Hey guys, and welcome back to another Java tutorial. Today we are moving off of user input and we're moving on to string methods. Now I know we already talked about strings, but we're going to delve a little bit deeper into these string methods and such. So before I begin the episode, let's go over the coding solution here. So we had a coding challenge. We had to declare 3 integers and have a user enter 3 different numbers that will be initialized to each integer. If all the numbers are the same, print all the same. Else print the mean of the numbers, which is taking the average. All right, so let's compile this guy and let's run it really quick. So they enter 3 numbers, 20, 21, and 22. Should print the average of 21. And if they entered all of the same numbers, 20, 20, 20, all the same is printed. Perfect. So now let's go over the coding here. So we declared 3 integers, num1, num2, and num3. And now we're trying to get user input, so we need to make sure we create a scanner. And I just called it input. Okay, and then it's a new scanner of system.in because we're getting input. Then we're going to initialize each of the inputs to the user's enter, like whatever the user enters. So num1 is equal to the input.nextInt, input.nextInt, input.nextInt. So that is how we initialize all 3 of them. And we're checking to see if they're all the same. So using the transitive property, we're doing num1 equals num2 and num2 equals num3. Therefore, the num1 and 3 has to be the same. And then if that's not true, then it's just going to add all 3 of the numbers up and divide by 3. And I had this all in one print method. You could make it another integer and call it average and do all the math there and print out that variable. You could do whatever you like in that. So this is my solution. This is what I have come up with. Now I know there's a lot more ways of writing this more concise. You will actually see in a couple episodes from now that I'm going to show you how to avoid this repetition and how to create it more concise and have it a lot less lines and run faster. That is down the road. Just getting to this point is amazing. All right, so now let's jump into the video of string methods here. So we're going to make a public class. So we're going to call it string methods, if I could spell. All right, and then open up your curly braces, your puppy ears. And then we're going to do a public static void main string args. And then you got to add those nice square braces or whichever you like to call them. Honestly, brackets. All right, so let's see here. So now we have that made. We want to compile it, toss this sucker into our Java folder. And let's think about this. All right, so we were talking about strings, so I'm gonna call it string word and we're gonna set it equal to apple. Okay, that is gonna be our string, so we can compile it. Everything's good, everything's nice and dandy. So now we're talking about methods. So in Java, strings act as an object. We treat them as objects. Now I'm gonna get into what objects are in the next couple of videos. I'm gonna be talking about objects most likely. But just to note, objects are able to use methods and different types of functions like that to be able to recall information and control different values. That's hence its name, object-oriented programming. You're able to control a lot of cool features with objects. So that's just a little bit of a huge big picture of what objects can do. That's not really technical, but that's just big picture. So now let's break it down though. For a word like this, we have some methods we can do, right? So if I use dot, there are a couple accessor methods that we can use that recall information for us. And we can do something called dot length, right? This word dot length is going to return the length of whatever the string is, how many characters there are in it, right? But in order to use this, we need to store it into another variable. So what I could do is I can call integer length equals, for now we're going to have it as 0, right? Because there's no word, we don't know what's the length of it, right? So we can compile it and it runs fine, but we need to use this correctly. So length is going to equal this word dot length, and let's print out the size of that. So we're going to print the length by compiling it and running it, and we're getting 5. So if we count it really quick, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You see, and if I add a space after apple, and I compile and run it, it's going to give me 6. So it counts the number of characters, not the number of letters. So keep that in mind, the number of characters, not letters. So you'll see why it does that, because if you have that extra leading white space or trailing white space, it's going to count that in. So when you are doing some bigger projects of parsing data and such, which I will get into that also down the road. That is a bigger task that is going to be able to take into account of that. So you might want to add a nice little comment here that says dot length, and you could say it returns number of characters. You can have whatever you want for that. So now let's move on to the next method here. So these are, I'm just putting a couple methods here. This is not all of them. There are a lot of them that are on here. So it is called .to uppercase. And also for that matter, we have a to lowercase. So now if I do system.out.print line, I could do word.to uppercase. And then I could also copy that and paste it and change it to lowercase. I'm guessing you guys already know what's going to be printed here, but if I run it, you can see that it says apple and apple in lowercase. So to uppercase, what it does is it returns the string in uppercase. All right, and then the same matter of the fact is that the other one is going to return the string in lowercase, right? So if you guys are following so far, we've already talked about 3 different methods. We have the dot length, dot to uppercase, and dot to lowercase. And the reason why I'm saying returns is that when I talk more about methods, and I know I said in the static methods video that I wasn't done talking about methods, there is a return type. And I will get into a video, probably next video, and I'm going to go far more in depth in how you can write methods specifically tailored to meet your needs. So each of these dot lengths and such, you can make methods that return certain things. So in the other ones I had void, which returned nothing, but just so you can understand the big picture of how these things work. So let's see, what else can we talk about here? We have already talked about this method actually, dot equals. And this compares 2 strings. So if I want to compare it, it's gonna return a Boolean. That's what I should say. Returns Boolean. Might want to put that in there, because if I do word dot equals and then I set it equal to let's say Microsoft, I think we already know what's going to be printed here, and we're expecting false. False. So it gives you either true or false of what it's going to print. So the next method I want to talk about is dot index of. So dot index of, it takes a parameter. I know we haven't really talked about parameters, but a parameter is the same thing in here. So in dot equals, it takes a string, right? You need to enter a string. Same thing with this. You need to enter a string for it to work. There are other ways you can enter characters and such to check between the two. But if I print out word.index of, and I know what I'm expecting, right? Let's say we already know the word's apple, and we want to see where the index of the L is, right? Where do we find L? So if I were to compile this and run it, it's going to give me the number 3. And you guys might be wondering, how does that work? Let's see. So we have A, P, P, L, E. If I were to go below it, we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So in Java and programming languages, whenever you're talking about indexes, the very first character is always 0. So it's always going to be, it starts off at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. So that is why Apple, even though there's 5, right? It printed 5 up here, so we know there's 5 characters without any trailing space. We know there's 5 characters or 5 letters in this. Then when you start your index, it has to start off with 0, so the last index is going to be 1 minus the string length. So what we're looking at here is A0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's why if I change this to an E, we should expect a 4 to be printed. If I run it, you can see 4. And also, if you print something, let me show you this. If I do capital E, and I compile it and run it, we're expecting -1. Which is weird, right? So when you're using .index of, or whenever you're searching for something that's not in there, -1 is like false. It means it's not in the array. It's not in the word. So it's going to return a -1 if it's not in the word at all. However, there is an E in apple, but there is nothing in this. So what you could do, there's two different ways you can combat this. If you really are looking for that uppercase E and it's not in there, then you know it's -1 and it's not going to be in the word. But if you're just entering a capital, even though you want it to be lowercase too, you can do word.toUppercase .index of, and now if I compile it and run it, it's going to give me that 4 because I'm making all the words uppercase. All right, so now moving on. So let's see here. We've talked about index of equals toUppercase to lowercase .length, but there are some more that I want to talk about. So there's something called concatenation, string concatenation. All right, so string concatenation. So this is the idea of adding two strings. I should say adding strings together. So if I want to do string new word, I can make it where it says word plus, and I could do Microsoft, right? And now if I were to print new word, and I compile it and run it, it's going to say Apple Microsoft. You see what I'm saying? So concatenation adds strings together. There's another way of doing this. I can make it where it says system.out.print. So we're going to print another one here, and we're going to try this out. We're going to do new word.concat, and then we're going to pass in another parameter. We can make it says technology if I'd want. So it's going to add technology to new word, and I'm printing that out. So now it says Apple Microsoft Technology. So that is two ways. It's really common to use the operator or the plus sign, or you can use .concat as a method as well. So these are two different ways you can add different strings together. String concatenation. Probably butchering that. So the next method I want to show is .substring. And this takes in two parameters or one, and it takes in the indexes, or there's another one called this. Whoops. So these are two different ways of calling .substring, right? So if I make let's use a new word here. And we're going to call it funny word and just call it funny. Okay, so if I compile it, it runs fine. But now we have a different thing here. So if I want to print this out to the screen, and I do funny word dot substring, and let me give this a nice thing at the top again for funny, and let me give you guys the mat. So we're looking at the word funny. That's what we have in funny word. 0 is F, 1 is U, 2 is N, 3 is N, and 4 is Y. So if I do the .substring, it takes in two parameters or one parameter, whichever we'd like to do. So we're going to try this top one out for now, the two parameter one. So it needs a start index and an end index. So it's going to take everything from the start, and it's going to stop right when it hits that end index. It's like a stop sign. You're going to stop there. You're not going to go past it. So you won't even use that end character. So if I want to say the word fun, we're starting at an F, right? That's where we want to start. So we know the first index is 0, and the end index, we're getting fun, but we don't want to include the next one. If we're thinking it's a stop sign, we can't go through it. So we're driving. Oh, there's a stop sign. We got to stop here right before we get into the next end, right? So we want 3 to be our index that we stop at, because we're not going past it. We're not going to include it, but we don't want to go past it. We don't want to go through it, okay? So if I compile this and run it, now it says fun. So that's how that one works. So you want to go all the way up until you stop at a stop sign. But the next thing you can do is if you do funny word dot substring and you only want to pass in one parameter. Let's say this time we want to start, what do we want to say? Let's say we want to say the word New York. Okay, NY. New York, NY. So we want to start at 3 to include it. And that's it. We're only going to pass 1 in, and I compile and run it. Now it only says NY. So what the bottom thing does is it starts there and it goes all the way up until the string's done. So if I start it at 0, if I start this one at 0, the bottom one, and I compile it and run it, it's going to print the entire word funny because it starts at F and it's going to go all the way to the end. So whichever I start at, like I start at 1, now it's going to say unny. So you can combine that with different things to create different words. If I want to make the word sunny, you could always concatenate, as we learned, an S plus this area here and create the word sunny. So there's a lot of different ways you can do cool stuff with that. Let's move on to the next method here. So actually, this is going to be the very last method I'm going to show. There's a lot more you can show, but this one is .trim. And this is what I was telling you about. So this is going to return the word without trailing white space. I guess I should say without trailing or starting white space. So what does that mean? If I make the word, let's call it white apple, right? Because we want the word apple, but we have white space around it. So if I were to really quickly show, and I want to print the word, so let's say this, white apple dot length. So up top we had the word apple, but it printed 5, right? This time if I run it, it prints the word 10, which is double the length that we want. This is obviously not the word apple. We don't know how many letters are in apple. So what we need to do is we need to trim it first. So if I do white apple dot trim dot length, now we should get the word, we should get 5. See, we get 5. So what's happening here is if let me show it one more time. Instead of showing it this way, if I do system dot out dot print line and we're to do white apple, and I were to copy this again, but I were to add dot trim at the end of it, this will make more sense. So if I compile it and run it, so we have apple with all this extra space before and after, right? But on this other one, there's none. If I try and drag it, there's no white space. So what is it doing here is it's removing all that white space. If it's equal to no string, it's just going to remove it out of the string. So basically what you can use .trim with is when you're parsing data from a file. And this is actually really important because it helps remove out any of those different strings around it. And you get just the bare string that you want. You don't have any of that no string that you don't want to use, that you don't want to parse. So this can save time when running files or different type of scripts you're trying to write and such. That is a little bit about the methods. So these are all the methods. These are just some of it. In the description down below, I'll paste a link to an entire article or a nice little tutorial point of this that shows everything about it. There's a lot on the list. These are just some of the most common ones that you'll be using. There's actually a couple that I left out, but for the next couple videos, I'm going to be referring to a lot of these things, especially .length and .substring a lot. These are really important ones. So make sure you are familiar with this, practice them out a bit, and they get really important. But before I leave you guys, let me give you guys a coding challenge. Alright guys, here's your coding challenge. This is a little bit lengthy of one. So you have to declare and initialize a string of your choice, print the word in all uppercase, print the word in all lowercase, print the length of the word, concatenate the word with ly as the suffix, and check to see if the word equals pair using .equals, and finally use index of to see if the character E is inside your word. Now print all of these on separate lines and bring this to the next episode. Let's see what you got. I believe you guys will do amazing on this one. And as always, have a good one, guys.